Thank you, Paula. We want to get to Anne and Adam and Vikram quite quickly, just to open up with a few vignettes or a few words from Trees for Tucson, which is the best known program of Tucson Clean and Beautiful. We've been in Sustainable Tucson in close contact with that organization for several years, and everyone knows Trees for Tucson. Their Facebook is a wonderful place to visit if you ever would like. A beautiful picture and a little quote or a little comment, and that's every few days they do something like that. Here's a few of them. How trees help us. Trees cool air temperature through a process known as evapotranspiration. As trees release water into the atmosphere from their leaves via transpiration, the surrounding air is cooled as water goes from liquid to vapor, similar to the principle of evaporative cooling, and just as sweating cools our skin. Especially in the arid Southwest, trees are a simple and effective way to reduce urban heat islands. And then another picture with the beautiful blossoms of the Texas mountain laurel. Nothing goes together like the intoxicating smell of the mountain laurel blossoms and the slow-moving, black buzzing carpenter bee. And they talk about the way the bee works, and because it's so big, it often makes an incision at the base of the flower to get the nectar, something I was delighted to discover when I moved to Arizona and we had a Tacoma plant out there in the garden with carpenter bees visiting it. And the last thing they say about the benefits of trees, the last thing for this evening, not for them at all. Trees clean the air. Humans are releasing pollutants into the atmosphere every single day, driving concerns for public health and well-being. But our friendly neighbor trees are lending us a helping hand, even if we can't see it. Trees absorb pollutants and particulates from the air through their leaves, bark, and roots. Just another reason for us to appreciate our trees and all their hard work. So this is a sample from Trees for Tucson. Katie Gannon, the director of Trees for Tucson and now eventually Tucson Clean and Beautiful, regrets she could not come tonight, but we're really glad to have Anne and Adam and Vikram. Briefly, I will introduce each and then describe our process. Adam is the director of horticulture at Tucson Botanical Gardens. He manages the care of a diverse palette of herbs, forbs, cactus, shrubs, and trees, and he does it with alacrity. As a garden steward and educator, Adam specializes in regenerative practices such as composting and mulching, and right now he's overseeing, as some of you heard at the beginning or before the beginning, a study of natural soil regeneration for the health and vigor of trees through inoculation with special bacteria. Maybe we'll have to have him come back for a talk on that one all alone. And Audrey is the lead consultant on Tucson's Urban Forest Master Plan, author also of the guidebook, Native Trees for Tucson, 10 Best Practices for Using Native Trees. Through the evening, I will pop a little paragraph of one of the guidebooks, such as that one that Anne has edited, drafted, or just produced all out by herself. So she is as prolific as one can be in this field. Other projects include a guide to insect and disease threats in urban forests of Arizona and Mexico, and editing a rainwater harvesting manual that's used all around the country. And we give a special welcome to someone from outside of Tucson, Vikram Krishnamurthy. He leads the Tree Equity Alliance, a cross-sector initiative launched by American Forests that unite diverse national partners to support the tree equity movement. Prior to American Forests, Vikram was executive director of the Delaware Center for Horticulture. This is an urban greening nonprofit based in Wellington. In addition to reinventing that center's branches to Chance's Workforce and Reentry Program, he helped to launch the Delaware River Climate Corps program. He has experience in urban forestry, land conservation, and local food systems. And his main goal is environmental justice. So the way we will proceed with our three guests is I have sent them ahead of time a few questions. I will ask them a question. Each one will get a chance to answer. And we're to 4 minutes, depending on how long that question wants to be answered. But we'll figure in about 40 minutes, then we will open up to questions from you, everyone else here in the room. As I said before, make sure what you have is a question. This is not a time to promote your favorite project or tell people about a neat cleanup somewhere, but rather let's just draw more of their knowledge out into the room with a thoughtful question. So I think we'll just go alphabetically from Adam to Anne to Vikram. And Adam, why do we need an urban forest?
Oh, yeah, when you sent me that question, there are books, entire encyclopedias to be written about that. And I just want to say quickly, thank you for having me, and I'm honored. I'm always honored to be in a room with Anne. I don't know why you need me. But yeah, why do we need the urban forest? Um, there there's a positive feedback loop that can be created once we hit certain levels of verdant shade in a city. And that's that shade is obviously cooling is probably the biggest thing to sell to Tucsonans. But even more so with that, you also bring in birds and wildlife of all types. You bring back insect communities that are sorely stressed. There's research showing that verdant space kind of not just lowers the temperature of the air around us, but can lower the temperature of our emotions and helps people find a center and a grounding. The research shows lowering of violence in communities from an urban forest as well. So and the lack of it is actually one of the, in my opinion, one of the worst parts about it. Without it, we just get hotter and hotter. And when we get hotter and hotter, we get drier and drier. And so we have a negative feedback loop without it, and then we'll get a positive feedback loop with it. And I'll leave that as my answer.
Thank you so much, Adam. And you kept it to 2 minutes. That's a great model for us all. So, Anne, what would you add to this?
Well, of stormwater cleanup, production of urban food supplies, in just the beauty that it provides. But I think when I think of why we need trees, it's so we won't end up like Phoenix with 95-degree nights. And so mitigation of urban heat island effects is my, what's driving me. There's countless lists of the benefits of trees, and we've all seen those lists before. But if we don't get on top of the producing our own shade and managing it in a healthy manner, our energy needs and our comfort are going to be drastically impacted by a lack of trees. And that also, as you say, Adam, the hotter it gets, the harder it is for the trees to survive. So for their sake and ours, we need a really healthy canopy.
Thank you, Anne. Vikram, what would you like to add?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Good evening. I do want to assure the audience, even though I'm located in Wilmington, Delaware, as I mentioned, I'm not an expert by any means on Tucson or Tucson's trees, but American Forest does have an Arizona team. We have several staff who are working with Phoenix, and my colleague Jake Simon has worked directly with Kate, as you mentioned, Stuart. So I do want to assure everyone that our organization does have a really strong presence in Arizona. I think, the most pressing issue, not to reiterate, but I do want to reinforce the notion of heat and urban heat with, the more development, the more gray infrastructure, as we refer to sidewalks and roads and pavement and even, roofs, things like that. And simply, the population, people, and
There
all of our
was a
activities
brief message that said something about
raise the temperature. And so I do want to reinforce what both Adam and Ann mentioned and talked about there. I think too, along with birds, trees are really important for supporting all kinds of pollinators that support our food system, and of course wildlife in a lot of ways, migration of wildlife and wildlife corridors. Trees are crucial for the movement of wildlife as well. And I think to really, Adam and Ann did such a great job. I think really just to sort of mention a couple of things that are maybe more esoteric. From an urban planning standpoint, trees really serve to soften the architecture of a city or a town in terms of buildings and gray infrastructure. So that notion of beauty, I, as a horticulturist, do my best to never neglect that. I think it's one of our basic human needs. So trees provide us with that as well.
Thank you. That's very beautifully put. The aesthetic part, we have a need for beauty as well as for cool. So what's one fact about trees in the urban environment that you would like everybody to understand? Everybody here, but also everybody in the community. What should we understand about trees? And then tell us why, if that would help us understand further. So Adam, you're first.
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about this question. Trees, what I want people to think about is that trees are new to the urban environment in a lot of ways. And especially the modern city, trees not evolved to be in a modern city. I guess that would be my main notion there is trees weren't meant to be in our cities, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be in our cities.
Since you were so quick with that, what are the implications for our urban foresters then, and that would include homeowners?
I always point out, we all know the old adage, when a tree falls in a forest, doesn't make a noise, no one is there to hear it. Change that a little bit. When a tree falls in a forest and no one is there, no one is in danger of being hit by a tree fall. That is not the case in an urban environment. The soils that trees evolved to be in, whether they're a native tree or not a native tree, are not the soils in the island on Speedway. And unless so as stewards of our environment, we have to recognize that we're displacing these living things, and we have to accommodate them appropriately.
I'm sure we'll be interested to hear more about that. But let's let Ann have a chance at this question. What's one fact about trees in your urban environment you would like us to understand?
Well, this is a broader factoid, perhaps. I've been reading a book about fungus by Merlin Sheldrake, which has to be the best name for a person who writes about fungus. He said 90% of the plants on Earth have beneficial fungal associates. And so I think it's really underemphasized now, and in the pre-meeting, Adam had a lot to say about the importance of these microbial associates with roots. So I think that's an important piece of information we should be really paying attention to. And I guess the implication of that is to inoculate trees put into the sterile urban environment by tiptoeing out to a similar cusp of trees that's been well established. And taking a little scoop of dirt, bringing it back, shaking it around, giving it a fighting chance, just giving it a fight, giving those new trees a fighting chance. And another factoid that I'd like to throw out, which I did the calculations for when I was working on the city's community forest action plan, was that the rainfall over the footprint of the city of Tucson and Tucson Water's delivery area is 10 times greater than the water demand that Tucson Water needs to meet. And most of that water demand is for outdoor use. So the fact that there's an abundance, in a sense, of water available for free to support these trees, I think is an important fact related to urban trees. And I have one more. Desert Museum hybrids are not doing well. And too many nurseries, that's the only Palo Verdes they have. So don't be tempted. Go get yourself a native Palo Verde. Stay away from those hybrids.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, Desert Museum hybrids were developed, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, and they were the hot new thing on the block because they grow really fast and they're pretty. And pretty soon that's all the nurseries were carrying them. And now there's not a parking lot I go to that's planted with Desert Museum hybrids that is not in a state of deterioration. And those have been planted, in the last 20 years, maybe, or less. They're really susceptible to Palo Verde scale. They get raggedy really fast. They're very short-lived. And Mark Dimmitt, who quote, found that hybrid occurring naturally, feels like he should do a mea culpa for ever starting that whole track. So I just wanted to throw that out because it's not often spoken about, but it's really something to watch out for.
Strong medicine, Anne, but kindly put. I think that's something we'll all think about. And Adams, you look like you know what Anne's talking about there, with that tree. Vikram, what would you say is an important thing for us not to forget about trees?
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think Adam and Ann both certainly referred to soils, and I think one immediate thing that I find in talking with people about trees is it's sort of easy to think about primarily the above ground part of a tree that we all see in terms of where trees are planted or how they're doing, their condition, et cetera. But I think it's important to just remember that some of the most important aspects of tree survival and tree success have to do with what's happening below the surface in terms of not just soil health and root health, but really setting a newly planted tree up for success in terms of having enough soil space to really be able to reach its full potential. Here in the eastern US, my experience has been that, in older cities that were, the first areas developed in our country, there's a lot less room. Trees weren't really incorporated into the city planning the way that they are now. And as that moved further west. So, trees are often kind of shoehorned into places where they, I think, are needed above ground, but the below ground infrastructure, whether that's already existing water infrastructure or sidewalks or, whatever it might be, can really be a limiting factor in sort of redesigning cities. So that's one thing. And I do, as I reviewed these questions, Stuart, I think this is the question where I think it makes a lot of sense for me to mention the term tree equity because it's what I'm focused on right now. And basically, I do know this is a term that folks are gonna be hearing more and more about. Basically, a lot of research in our field of urban forestry has really demonstrated that due to historic policies involving housing, city development, transportation, the U.S. highway system going through cities, and a lot of other factors, lower income neighborhoods and communities of color have a strong correlation with lower urban tree canopy. There is research going on right now having to do with causation of why exactly that is. but the correlation research is very strong. And so that's the notion of tree equity, is that the research also shows that the lowest income neighborhoods have an average of 26% less tree canopy cover, and on average are 6 to 8 degrees hotter. Communities of color, minority communities, have an average of 38% less tree cover and can be as much as 14 to 16 degrees hotter in the summer. And, those are average numbers. So what occurred to me thinking about Tucson is that Tucson, I'm sure, in relation to those average numbers, Tucson and Arizona in general, probably on the higher end of those scales. American Forests has developed something called the Tree Equity Score, which basically analyzes this. And so I just want to mention this because Stuart shared with me the Tucson Million Trees website. And so I do know that the city of Tucson and other breeding partners have used Tree Equity Score to really determine where are trees most needed across the Tucson area.
Wow, more strong medicine for us and well received, I believe. Did you say 26% less canopy cover for people of lower income, but 36 less for people of color?
Yes.
And then it was,
And those are not mutually exclusive. So
right.
Yeah.
And then the temperature for the first group, 6 to 8 degrees hotter. That's pretty striking. But then you said, how many degrees hotter for the people in communities of color?
And it's an average of 13 degrees hotter, but it can be as much as 14 to 16.
Wow.
Yeah.
Takes us back to what Ann said about not wanting to be like Phoenix. Some people are already, as it were, living in Phoenix here.
Yes, and Phoenix is an area where American Forest is doing quite a lot of work with Mayor Gallego, and not only tree planting, but really analyzing where can newly planted trees have the most impact.
Wow. All right. Well, thank you. You all are being quite compassionate for our attendees, so they get a chance to ask their questions pretty soon, but I think we're getting a little deeper. Adam, what is Tucson Botanical Gardens doing to extend and enhance the urban forest?
Well, Tucson Botanical Gardens probably has the densest tree canopy in Tucson. And a big part of my job is to make sure that remains true. Tucson Botanical Gardens is also currently working on expansion plans where and whenever possible. And so that goes along as well. However, probably the biggest and our most important efforts are in our education department. We offer classes on a regular basis regarding all aspects of tree and tree planting, and basically improving the verdant landscape. On top of that, we are the best place in town to go if you want to see this difference in temperature. If you don't believe this to be true, or if you have any doubts, come to the Tucson Botanical Gardens, walk through our cactus and succulent garden, which is our lowest shade space, our sunniest spot, and then as you walk west towards what we consider our historical side of the gardens, where the tree canopy gets to be in the 65-70% shade range, coverage range, you feel the temperature drop. I haven't had a walkthrough ever in my time there where someone hasn't made that comment as I'm giving a tour. Oh my gosh, did it just get cooler? It's like, yes, it did, because of the trees. And so I'll leave it there.
Thank you for those comments and for the work on which those comments are based. And now you want to speak for yourself, I believe, on this one, or would you?
Yeah, I'm just kind of speaking for myself. But I did want to say that when I hadn't been to the botanical garden for quite a while when I went there, and I saw those towering trees. I went, oh my God, this is what happens when you water plants in the desert. Nice.
They grow.
They grow really big. If you'll put up with me for a minute, Stuart, I'm just going to do a quick screen share of this compendium of things I've worked on. It's a faster way for me to talk about it. And if people want a copy of it, I see Stuart's putting in some links in here. I'm not sure these chat records always are continued, you know, so that people can access it. So if you want an email copy of this, maybe give Paula your email address and she can send it to your group. But I'm just going to if that's okay, do a quick screen share.
Now, Trace or Paula, let's make sure she's got the screen sharing capacity.
Okay, yeah, you've disabled me.
Okay, let's hope that one of them is there and they can enable you. They might be working on T.
Okay, yeah, whatever. I'm just going to do a quick read. So the 10 best practices for using using native trees in urban environments, it really goes through all the sort of practicalities of planting, pruning, watering, maintaining trees. And these are native trees. These are trees native to the Sonoran Desert or very near natives. So that's a website at Tucson Clean and Beautiful is hosting that product. There's a larger website hosted by the Arizona Community Tree Council of climate resilient native trees for Arizona and New Mexico. And this is a broader palette of native trees, 65 species that pulls more from into Mexico, northern Mexico, into West Texas, into Baja, into the Mojave Desert and the Chihuahuan Desert. And many of those can do well in Tucson. So that's another resource, and that's a searchable database. Then the Leaf Network, Growing Arizona Edible Forest Guide, is another website hosted by ACTC. And it specifically addresses both native and non-native edibles around the state of Arizona. And you can search for these based on your elevation. So it's pretty easy to hone in on what might grow there. The Tucson Community Forest Action Plan. And by the way, Vikram, that action plan for the city of Tucson is primarily driven by the tree equity scores for Tucson. And the first priority is to plant in those areas with low tree equity scores. So that's available now at the Climate Action Hub for the city of Tucson.
And I'm going to jump in for a second. And Paula's got.
Not a question, but Trace set it up so that you should be able to share your screen if you still want to.
Okay, well, you're sort of popping this in, Stuart, but the main thing is if you want a hard copy of this list with the links, give your email address to Paula or Stuart, and they can send it around. The final thing that I worked a lot on is the Urban Tree Threat Response Guide for Arizona and New Mexico. And as our trees get more stressed and in the urban environment, we're seeing existing threats and pests that are getting more aggressive and more successful in attacking trees. Also, there are always new threats coming into North America, and some come from the East Coast, some come from the West Coast. So this website and the compendium of species there is looking at both existing threats and potential new ones. And some of these potential new ones can be pretty devastating. That database right now, there's 22 species there. We're going to be adding another about 40 species in the coming 15 months. So that'll be a pretty good guide for it throughout the Southwest. So that's what I've been working on. And I do this through grants with the Arizona Forestry Department, working with the Arizona Community Tree Council, with the City of Tucson Urban Forestry Division, and Tucson Clean and Beautiful. I've worked with all of those organizations.
Wow, thank you, Anne. We've got some good reading to do over the next week now. And at least some of us. Vikram, I know you've given us a little taste, but tell us more what your organization is doing to enhance and extend the urban forest nationally.
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. I think the most appropriate sort of Anne mentioned, and we've talked about the Million Trees and Sustainability Hub site for Tucson. I would encourage everyone, if you go to that main page, you'll see the tree equity score results there. I believe it's something like 30 of the 466 areas in the city analyzed have achieved what we consider to be tree equity. And so there's a lot of work to be done. And I think sort of, if you think about the scale of Tucson, what American Forests is doing is really promoting this tool and this model across the country. And actually, we, in December, launched it in the UK as well. So this is really intended to be a free open source tool for any community to use across the country. And so American Forests as an organization, I think when it comes to urban forestry, is really facilitating the cities that want to make advancements in this area, in this arena, for lowering temperatures and really taking these kinds of action steps when it comes to climate change, and engaging residents in a way that through volunteerism and through tree planting really gives people their own sense of taking action and feeling that people can, that one can make a meaningful difference by taking that kind of action. So the next level step with the tree equity score is something called the Tree Equity Score Analyzer. And I'm sure that some of these recommendations are included in the master plan for Tucson. But basically, once that tree equity analysis is done, then it moves towards, what are the solutions? Where are the areas that are the highest priority for planting? Are there issues of land ownership or land access that need to be addressed? What does this mean in terms of population? It's really not just about the trees, but it's about the trees where people live. And so sort of the characteristics of a city or community are just as important as the tree cover in terms of matching up not only the tree supply, if you will, but where the demand is in terms of where people really need them.
And we are grateful, by the way, for this leadership that your organization is providing.
Thank you.
So what's one mistake we need to be careful not to make? I'll tell you my answer. I read a book about sort of the history of trees in the United States. And one of the big problems, it comes in the form of insect-borne diseases, or just insects doing damage. And I'm not an expert, so I will now be quiet and listen to Adam and Vikram.
Actually, and I was looking at the chat, and Nancy asked a really powerful question about how do people that are just struggling to get by manage to improve soils and make trees possible. And I guess that actually points to what I would say would be a big mistake, is getting too far ahead in terms of trees and their care. So trees do need care. They are not an investment that you can just put in the ground and then ignore if they're in the urban environment. And so it is a collective effort. This is why the organizations that we're mentioning are so important, because they help with this tree care in areas that can't afford it. And so that's, I would say, that's one of the big mistakes I feel that can be made, is planting lots and lots of trees without a plan for their long-term care. And I actually don't think Tucson is making that mistake. I think with the organizations supporting tree planting in town and the city's commitment to do better, I believe we are on the right track to care for the trees that we're putting in. But trees are an expense. As much as we talk about them giving us so much, well, they give us so much if we have to give them as well. And so if you ever had to have a lot of tree work done on a large tree on your property, you know how expensive that can be. And so answering Nancy's question is one of the things as a community we need to be able to help the people care for those trees, because the trees might be on their property, but the trees are serving everyone, not just those folks.
Thank you, Adam. Anne, what would you like us to be sure not to?
I want you to be sure not to put a tree in the ground if you haven't figured out how it's going to be watered for the first 3 years. And if you figured out how it's going to be watered for the first 3 years, then you'll know how to water it for the rest of its life. But this notion of just plunking a tree in and not creating the water harvesting basin or looking at the catchment area that's going to flow to that, or thinking how you can get it gray water or condensate water, air conditioning condensate water, please figure out where your condensate water goes off your air conditioner. It's a huge source of water, and it's free and it's generally clean. So that would be my list of the biggest mistake. But I also suggest everybody get one of these things. This is a soil moisture sensor. They're really cheap, like $10 at Amazon. And this is your friend as you learn about your soil. Because if you go out to a compacted dirt driveway after it's had water sitting on it in a big storm and you stick this in it, you're going to get no response because it will not have infiltrated because it's too compacted. If you go to a water harvesting basin after a small rain and you stick it in, it might go halfway down. This is how you get to know the soils at your property. It's inexpensive and it's a really great tool. It doesn't even need batteries, apparently, and they just seem to work forever. So highly recommend. Yeah.
I'll just chime in and say that whenever I'm training a new gardener, and even my experienced gardeners, I make sure that's the tool they get when it's watering time.
Yeah.
It's very
And
important. It's easy to discount, but it's very important.
Very helpful. And also look at your plants. Your plants are talking to you. A lot of our natives, they don't have to have, you don't have to stick this in the ground and it goes, ooh, hi, I'm really wet. It can be fairly low and the plants are fine. So learn to read your plants and then become interactive with them and know when to water them. And the soil, the root zone, and you would know, Adam, you've poked around more roots than I have. What, 1 to 3 feet below land surface? And at the canopy drip line or 2 to 3 times that width. So that's where you want the water going in at, particularly at the drip line. And this can be your friend to find out what's going on there. So.
It's so fun to hear people who know trees talk about those trees. And Vikram, please, what would you add to the list of things to avoid?
Yeah, thank you, Stuart. And I'll be brief because I know we want to get to audience questions. I think my answer is not very different, all that different from both Adam's and Anne's. It's about sort of that care and really tree survival and tree success. And I think the biggest mistake that we can make is not engaging the communities where these trees are being planted. So, that sets the tree off on a course where if people are less engaged or even perhaps resent a tree planting project that they didn't have a part in or didn't have a say in, that really, is setting the trees up for failure. So I think that kind of engagement, when it's done the right way, that's what can ensure the success. And so I think that's huge because, trees in terms of Nancy's question that caught my eye as well. Trees. One of the things that this Tree Equity Alliance that I'm leading is really intent on is making the case that trees are just one part of building healthy, sustainable, resilient communities. And so there are a lot of other ingredients and ways that a community can be engaged, including in jobs. American Forests has set a goal for 2030 to work with our partners to engage 10,000 individuals in urban forestry jobs and careers. So that's another way to engage the local community in ways that gives back to people. as well.
Thank you. Well, I'm hearing from your introduction that you might like to open up to the audience questions. There was one more question I had of each of you, but shall we see if everyone's going to ask you that anyway? Or should we run through?
Totally up to you, Stuart.
All right. Well, I think let's see what happens if we start just hearing from the audience. Please, just last reminder. First of all, we're really glad you came today, and it's neat to see so many faces, especially if you ask a question. It's nice to show your face. It kind of helps us connect the voice and the person. But in any case, raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and we will make sure they're brief so our guests have really time to digest and reply.
To finish up Nancy's question earlier, in terms of soil improvement and cost, things of that nature, some things like home composting is a very good way to improve soil at no cost. Yes, there's a lot of education to be had, but that is a very basic way to do that. And then
Okay.
Another good way to do that is to go under an old existing mesquite tree or a collection of native trees and harvest some of the duff from under those trees, which will be 2 or 3 inches deep and full of rabbit poop. And that's also a pretty good soil enhancement, I think. Probably get some good fungi from that too. And
where could we find such accessible and legal access? I mean, we don't go to Reed Park and scrape away their dog.
Yeah, you don't want to do it at Reed Park. Well, that's a pretty good question. I happen to have some sources, but you may have some neighbors who think that's really, they want to rake up their mesquite pods and get rid of that stuff. And I've seen big black plastic bags full of rakings from under native trees that are really resources and shouldn't be put in the trash. So just keep your eyes out. Might be able
Tucson has a lot of alleyways with very old volunteer trees. With that exact kind of material underneath it.
All right, so now we know where to go for some of our mulch. Great tips. Well, let's see. Since people are still writing out their one-sentence questions, why? Oh, here comes from Keith or Millie Learman, please. Go ahead, Millie.
Doesn't seem like it should take long to come off of mute and video, but it does. So hopefully I got down to one sentence. Someone just mentioned, I think it was Adam, volunteer trees in the alleys. In my experience, this is a long sentence, pods actually do like to germinate under certain natural and unirrigated conditions, like under rocks and under other plants and things. And so I have a lot of questions associated with that, but maybe instead of going around planting trees, could there be value in educating people how to foster their own volunteers by creating passive basins, adding little features, borrowing pieces of, or not borrowing, but accepting somebody else's tree and bush trimmings to use as shelter for these new little things. It seems like there could be, if you have a little space with a little bit of dirt, there could be ways to foster soil health and volunteer trees, which theoretically would not need irrigation.
I'll just kind of pop on that one and say, to some degree, yes, I always tell my gardeners the most native plant is the one that started growing without you doing anything to it. And so yeah, I think that's a possibility. The trouble with that is a lot of the time, those kinds of sprouts pop up in places that I guess can be inconvenient in some ways, but also actually destructive in other ways, or unsafe. And so that's sort of the balance you do there with things like that. But I do agree in general that yeah, fostering volunteer plants is always a good idea.
And I'll just add that in the the Community Forest Action Plan, there's a page on that, on supporting volunteers if they're in the right place. And you do that by, yes, creating some water catchment around them, putting a little mulch on it. And the reason they're so valuable is because we found that if you plant a mesquite seed inside a tall pot, 18 inches tall of dirt, which we did for Tucson Audubon's restoration projects, that mesquite root will make it down to the bottom of that pot in 6 weeks. So that's what that taproot wants to do. And if you have a seed growing in the soil, that's what that root is doing. If you grow those in a pot, it hits the bottom of the pot and it starts coiling around. So it's intrinsically a less, starting out with some handicaps. So yeah, those self-seeding ones are really valuable. And you can go and collect that seed too and start throwing it into the holes, the little depressions you have at your site, and give them a chance. They'll either do it or not. You haven't lost anything by giving them a chance. They like to be scarified. A lot of desert seeds do. So take a pair of scissors and just snip the side of the seed a little bit, throw it in water, soak it, and then when you throw them out, they might have a better chance.
Thank you.
Vikram, would you like to comment on that particular issue?
I don't feel qualified to comment on mesquites, but I will say, I mean, my only addition is, we have major challenges here in the eastern part of the country with invasive plants, which love to volunteer. So I would say, if mesquites are the primary tree that volunteers and emerges, then no problem. But it sort of gets back to that right tree in the right place mantra, making sure that it's, not only the right conditions for a tree, but also that it's something that you want there in the landscape. It can be difficult to envision sort of what the mature size of a tree is really going to be, and what that's going to mean for the landscape and its surroundings. So I think keeping that in mind is really important as well.
Yeah, and lots of different species of natives will volunteer. I see a comment here about, aren't the large majority of volunteer mesquites in Tucson actually hybrids? And yeah, they're hybridizing between the native velvet and some of the South Americans. But, if they want to grow and if they're in an appropriate place and they're not growing into utility lines or blocking traffic, they will turn out to be a useful tree. The mesquite hybrids are not as problematic as the Desert Museum Palo Verde hybrid.
And thank you. That's the most appreciative comment I've heard from our team about hybrids. So great to hear that perspective. Wanda's got a question.
I've been having some trouble with my audio. Give me a thumbs up that you can hear me. Yes, okay, thanks. So since somebody mentioned mesquite volunteers, I have a question that I haven't been able to get an answer to. It might be too specific, but if you know, I would appreciate it. I live out of Tucson a little bit. I have a really big yard, and I think all of my mesquites are native. As far as I know, none of them are hybrids. And I would like to transplant some of the volunteers, but my questions are, what size can they be transplanted? I guess would be my first question. And second is, what are sort of the size parameters? And third, is there third and fourth, is there any special way to do that? And then the care after they're transplanted. So if any of the presenters or anybody else here has answers to those, I would appreciate it. And after that, I may have a comment if there aren't other questions.
You want that one, Adam?
Actually, I thought you were going to be the most.
I could, yeah,
qualified to answer that.
you know, I wouldn't personally, if I saw a little mesquite seedling, I don't think I'd bother with it because chances are that root's a lot longer than what you're seeing growing above ground. I mean, that's just what we experienced at Tucson Audubon. But the fact that those are sprouting at that time means you've got some well-soaked seeds. So I would collect the seeds, maybe get yourself a milk carton of dirt, you know, some native soil and a little, you know, bought soil if you want to, and start creating your own little nursery. That's going to be much more successful for you when you go to try to transplant, I would guess.
Yeah, so horticulturists, we're trained not to be all that compassionate to every plant we come across, because we can't. And I would say that, yeah, for your own labor purposes, starting viable seed in pots you can grow a lot more with less time and effort doing that than trying to dig up ones that have started. And yes, you inevitably you're transplanting, and so what I said before of the volunteer tree being the most native, well, you're just kind of subtracting that all together once you're digging it up to move it.
Thanks for both of those answers. Some of my volunteers happen to be where I don't want them. So I thought, well, maybe, but I don't really want to kill them either. So I thought, well, maybe I could transplant them. But you make a good point, Anne, about the root. I'm probably, some of them are a foot, 2 feet tall now. So I would probably be dealing with some, an extensive root system. And I don't even know, would they live? So that I would be curious about too. I'd hate to just dig them up and then kill them. So thanks for all the thoughts.
Well, thank you. Let's go to Jana's written question. Would you recommend leaving the leaves instead of raking them up so that they could decompose to build the soil?
Easily, absolutely, yes.
Leave the leaves. Okay. This will be a 10-second pitch for our Clean Sweep program. We are encouraging the city and other entities to stop using gas-powered leaf blowers especially. And one of the reasons that's least discussed is that when you're blowing leaves away from the soil, you're robbing the soil and therefore the plants of valuable nutrients and cover. So let's see, another question in the chat was, oh, Gigi, who, by the way, is with toxin-free Pima County, wonders about the Rus lancea, a beautiful shady sumac, I believe from Africa. Someone can correct me if I've got that wrong. What are its pluses? What are its minuses? It certainly volunteers all over town.
And could talk better about it too. But that is one of our few invasives. That there are, if you really like root sumacs, there are native sumacs, and plant those. But no, the Rus lancea is an invasive and causes a lot more problems than it helps with.
Yes, I'm really leery of using Rus lancea leaves because it's, you know, if you wake up the leaves, you're getting a lot of seeds. And then you need to recognize the seedlings and just go brutally yank them out. I mean, but if you want to see a Rus lancea that's actually mature at the University of Arizona on the south side of the big anthropology, you know, state museum building, is a mature Ruslansia that's been cultivated and taken care of for a long time, and it is a beautiful tree. But there aren't very many of the tree Ruslansias that look like that around town. Most they just look like scraggly shrubs and yeah.
All right, thank you. So let's see if we have any more hands up. Well, let's go back to the last question that I posed to our guests before they came. And maybe this will be where we round up. You may have said this already, and maybe you'd like to say it in a different way, or maybe there's something that hasn't been said yet. What can people do to expand shade in our urban environment? And that could mean people on their property, people in their community, people who are in positions of decision, such as business owners, nonprofit directors, leaders of congregations, houses of worship, or our elected officials or their staff. So really opening up what can various people at all levels of our community do? And I'm going to ask Dwayne just to moderate for a moment because I need to step away. When I come back on screen, I can pick up from Dwayne. Thank you, Dwayne. We start with Adam, we'll go then to Ann and then to Vikram.
That's always a good question, and I guess the easy answer is you can plant trees. There's always a way to plant trees, whether you have the space in your own property, or if you don't own property at all, there's an organization you can help. There's always someone around planting trees. You can help a neighbor, and I'll really leave it there. And then beyond that, if you don't have room on your property and you're financially able, you can help fund the organizations planting trees. I feel like I've been constantly going to an economic side of this, but we need the funding to care for these life forms, and so whenever that's possible, I highly recommend doing that. But yeah, if you don't have the personal funds for that, then there's always someone you can join in planting.
And Tucson Clean and Beautiful has a website where it's talking about planting activities. If you want to join in, you can just plug right in and do that, or organize in your own community. I would say one of the most important things to do is keep the trees we have in good shape. So if your Aleppo pine is starting to look a little stressed out, it's getting hot, the monsoon is late, go ahead and water it. Water it at the drip line, water it all the way around the drip line with a soaker hose or something, because it's going to cost you $5,000 to remove the carcass of that tree if it dies. And a lot of them have died. So take care of the existing trees, keep an eye on them. And however, whether you yourself have control or if you know people have control, try to encourage people not to over prune trees, not to try to take our multi-trunk natives and turn them into single trunk trees. It never works. It drastically reduces the shade. It damages the trees, it weakens them, and it looks ridiculous. So, I mean, it's hard to go up to a landscaper and say, stop shearing that tree. But if you have any control, if you have any influence, try to exert it as best you can. And I know Katie Gannon at times has been driving around and saw some landscape crew doing that, and she got out of her car and she gave him an earful. So it's a problem because landscapers are sent out there to cut, and they're supposed to come back with a trailer full of cuttings. And it doesn't look like they've done their job if their trailer's not full of cuttings. And that's very unfortunate because many of these trees they're maxed out. They should not be pruned anymore. And
I,
it's, yeah.
I thank you, Anne. That's actually, I can't believe because I actually had written that in my notes about this question earlier. It's a skill to cut on trees. You can't put the branch back once it's cut. And I highly recommend, especially if they're your own trees, that you don't let anyone touch your trees with anything bigger than a pair of hand snips if they do not have the proper training to do so. That's exactly right. Someone with a chainsaw that doesn't know what they're doing can permanently damage your tree, can cause it to die, and that tree's not gonna, the damage that they do that would cause the death, the tree's not gonna die when they're cutting it. It's not even gonna die maybe that year, but with improper pruning, you are dooming a tree. So thank you, Anne. Yes.
Vikram, it looks like it's your turn.
Sure, thank you. When I asked my Arizona colleague, Jake Simon, to share some information with me about Tucson, and Jake does a lot of work in Phoenix, he said his immediate reaction was, you know what, Tucson is doing it the right way. And they're miles ahead of other communities that we work with at American Forest. So, every city's on a, certain part of the continuum, if you will. And so that was definitely encouraging. I think I definitely agree with Adam's comments about planting. I think if you're with the church congregation, planting trees is fun. And if you're with the church congregation, it's always fun to do more with a group of people that you're familiar with. So, whether it's a school group, a church group, whatever it might be, your company, your business, we work with a number of businesses to do employee tree plantings. So that's definitely, I think, part of it. And to Anne's points, I couldn't agree more about the importance of protecting mature trees, because, better to protect a mature tree and all of its benefits that it's already providing than starting from scratch. And that really has to do with, ordinances and regulations and making sure that those kinds of measures are in place for protecting trees during construction, protecting root zones. And, that comes down to advocacy, not to sound too much like the Lorax, but I think that, speaking for the trees, decision makers and elected officials pay attention when they know that constituents are paying attention, that residents are paying attention. And so I think making sure that trees stay, at the forefront of issues related to, development, redevelopment, transportation changes, that all that kind of planning. One of the most frustrating things I think across our field of urban forestry is that trees can often be an afterthought when it comes to new residential development, redevelopment, new projects, et cetera. And, the more that people can advocate for including trees and green space as the initial steps of planning in those stages, I think that'll go a long way to what the ultimate results can be.
I'm curious, Anne, to what extent the urban forest plan addresses what Vikram just said, making building trees into code for new developments and just other policy changes around.
Well, I did talk to Nicole Gillette today, the urban forest program manager, and she said that she and her colleagues have been working over the last year on developing and revising the city's standards for staff and city contractors on how to plant and water and care for and prune trees on city land holdings. And those standards are now being shared with the contractors who work for the city, and they're the basis for a more consistent and highly aware approach to managing trees. So it's not like sending guys with pole saws out to the wash anymore and just whacking away. Anything you can reach gets whacked. there is now an internal standard. And that it's internal to the city now, although it's being shared. But Nicole said that 2025 will be an important year for the urban forest because they will have more metrics up at their website related to trees. You can add your tree to the million tree count. They'll have the urban forest inventory that they've been working on city land, available to the public. And they'll be promoting the Tucson Forest Action Plan, which is really a to-do list. That's what that document is. It's a to-do list. And that works for grassrootsy people, and that works for bureaucrats and everybody in between. So she's gearing up for a big sort of promotion of that information in 2025. And also you can go to the city's website now, the Climate Hub, scroll down and you will see the action plan that is formatted as a PowerPoint presentation in English and Spanish, a long form and a short form. And anybody can download that document, show it to their church group, show it to their neighborhood association, show it at a Sustainable Tucson meeting. It's pretty self-explanatory. So you can engage right now in sharing those to-do steps that that everyone can participate in to some degree.
Thank you, Anne.
I saw a question, and please forgive me for not pronouncing the name correctly, but Rithwick asked, I know heat deaths were on the rise in Phoenix this past year, as were similar trends in Tucson. Were there similar trends in Tucson? I'm not sure if you're asking about plant deaths or people deaths. Both are true. If so, I'm sure tree care and planting initiatives are more important now than ever. So yes, I would. I'll focus on the plant side of things because that's what I know about. Yes, Tucson this summer crossed a line for a lot of species of plants, not necessarily our natives, but crossed a line for a lot of species of plants of too hot for too long without the evening temperatures cooling things down. And there was tremendous plant loss. We're actually still going to be seeing plant loss from that. People, a lot of times we forget that a catastrophic event that causes death can happen to a plant, and we don't know that the plant that causes that's going to cause a mortality, but that mortality might not actually happen in our eye for a year, sometimes two. So yes, that is very much the case, that that plants have a threshold for cold. We all know about that frost threshold, but plants also have a threshold for heat, and that varies between species. But yes, a lot of plants were lost this summer because of heat, not because of lack of watering or anything else, just straight heat.
That's very sobering. And
Stuart, if I could speak to the people side.
please, yes.
I don't know the actual figures, but I've mentioned a couple of times my colleague Jake Simon, who works a lot in Phoenix. He's attending a conference there called Green Biz, I believe. And I just learned this morning that Mayor Gallego spoke to the audience today and mentioned that heat deaths in Phoenix just surpassed in 2023, surpassed the number of homicides. So I don't know those exact figures, as I said, but it gives you a sense of the severity and the seriousness of it in terms of, sort of the ranking of causes of death.
It's a kind of slow motion homicide by human inaction to do the carbon drawdown that we need to do. All right. So I think we're getting close to closing. And but here's a question from Dwayne. Are there healthy and unhealthy ways to water trees with human urine? Are there species that are more or less compatible? I will say that we, way back in UC Berkeley, we were learning about urban composting, and we were encouraged to bring our urine in clean containers to go into the compost bin that was there on the campus plot. So, what do you say? Who can take this one on?
I think it's Anne's turn. I don't know. I can't.
I would
I
try
can't answer that one.
condensate myself. I'd be working with condensate, you know.
Okay.
Well,
I can
I'm happy to cover. So
Yeah.
in terms of urine is safe in terms of pathogens. So you don't have to worry about that. It is a high source of nitrogen. Urine is usually the issue would be burning of plants. And so if you water that down, yeah, you are adding nitrogen, water soluble nitrogen to the soil, which is one of the main nutrients plants need to grow. So yes, there's no way we have had agriculture in the same spaces for the thousands of years that we have had, except for the fact that we have processed all of our waste.
Thank you. And Wanda, I thought you had a question, but I guess not.
Well, if there's time, I was just going to comment that one of the most important benefits for me of trees is that they give us a lot of food. I've been harvesting ironwood beans, mesquite beans, and Palo Verde beans for decades, and they're absolutely delicious. And mesquite flour is just one of the most wonderful things to bake with. And there are two organizations in Tucson, beantreefarm.com, where Barbara Rose trains people how to harvest things from the desert, and desertharvesters.org, where they teach people how to take care of desert trees and also how to harvest and use the products from trees. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
And Mission Garden is a good resource too for the edibles. Here's a question about planting trees closer together and understory plants. You know, Brad Lancaster sort of decides a lot of things about how he plants by going out and looking at natural conditions and seeing what's growing close together. And you go out and you look at a wash, the plants are going to be dense. They're going to be bigger because there's more water. If you, you know, in your yard, if you just have limited water harvesting capacity, you can go ahead and put plants in at a higher density. Some of them may die, that's okay. And they'll find their own comfortable density that way. I think having understory is really important. I think it does shade the soil under plants, and that, you know, it doesn't seem to bother a mesquite to have something growing under it. Some things are pretty symbiotic, some aren't. You know, can't really grow creosote with an understory, or I wouldn't recommend putting it near other trees. But you could play with that. And you know, I've put in a lot of plants and I bet half of them died. And it's like, well, and I'm like, tough love, tough love for plants. I've invited you in. If this isn't the right place for you, I'm going to go pick one of these things that did make it and put it where you were. And I'm not going to feel bad about it. You know, it's okay. The plants need to work it out. And that's just my philosophy, but.
I can almost guarantee, other than Vikram, maybe I've killed more plants than anyone here, most likely. It's just kind of the part of the nature of my job. And so yes, very true. And to the point, I'll say with density, because Tucson Botanical Gardens, again, is one of the densest shades in town. I've got trees way too close together in terms of recommended recommended planting distance. And my philosophy on that is you can pretty much put as many plants into a space as you want to. The farther away from natural you are in terms of spacing, the more intensive you as the gardener, as the arborist, has interventions have to occur. So you, to some degree, you can do what you want, but it's going to take more effort of a gardener or an arborist to make sure that those plants stay healthy.
Okay. And so let's see if you might like to just make some last words, each of you, Anne, Adam, and Vikram. Just think for a moment if there's a last message perhaps you'd like to repeat something to drive the point home, or echo something, or just bring a new idea out. I will say, while you're thinking, that there are so many points that you've brought out, all the way from the particulars of how you're going to handle, what distances of trees and things of that sort, and whether or not to keep the volunteers, to looking at these huge systemic issues of how is our society set up such that we have people who are in shade-starved areas, and how can we turn that around? What are we doing? As Vikram suggested, we're doing a lot in Tucson in an attempt to turn that around. It's going to take some years. Fortunately, it can be fun on the way. Martha Graham, the great modern dance pioneer in mid-20th century, said, "It takes 10 years to make a dancer." And I heard that as a college student. I said, that's fine, because it's going to be fun doing those 10 years. So I hope we can make our 10 years of getting this urban forest planted and cared for, and more people engaged. Let's make it fun. So now, Adam, sorry, Anne, you're unmuted. So would you like to give us your parting words?
Adam, or
Hey, go ahead, Anne. You're
I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years really getting to know the native trees. And when I go to a nursery and I ask for a cat claw acacia, it's like, what's that? I was trying to find a foothill palo verde. I only found one nursery in town that had it. So I think it's really important now for us to start spreading these native tree lists around and start asking for them, so that people know that we have some demand for them, because that should really be the basis of our expanded tree canopy. Get back to the natives. They can take the heat. We're lucky. We're not Yuma. If you want to see what hot is, see what grows in Yuma or Phoenix. So in a way, we're blessed to be at 2,500 feet. So we'd still have a broad palette we can choose from. And the more you buy natives and plant them, I think the more resilient our canopy will be.
Thank you, Anne. How about Vikram?
Yeah, thanks everyone. I think I just posted a link in the chat. I think you all are taking time out of your evening to attend this evening's program, so you obviously care. And I think the Million Trees campaign has a really good graphic there on what people can do to get involved and to stay involved. There are some ideas like giving the gift of trees, becoming a sponsor, involving your business, etc. And I think, what's interesting about the issue of tree equity, as I look at some of the maps, like for my own city of Wilmington, Delaware, the tree canopy really does sort of mirror and mimic other challenges that certain neighborhoods have. So I think I would encourage everyone to, yes, obviously advocate for and support initiatives to plant more trees and to care for trees. I'd encourage everyone to keep in mind that trees are just part of the solutions that, neighborhoods and communities are really struggling with.
Thank you for that reminder, Vikram. And I'm sorry, Adam.
There we go. Well, I'll kind of want to, I'll point out two things. One very kind of sobering, one I hope is hopeful. That Tucson has already experienced a collapse of our tree canopy. If you look at historical pictures of Tucson, while the rivers were still running above ground before the water table dropped, we had cottonwoods, we had sycamores, we had an extensive tree canopy that we lost, and when we lost it, it was a collapse, and so that's an important thing to remember, that we're trying to recover what's been lost in a lot of ways. And so I actually encourage anyone to look at older photographs, especially ones taken from a bird's eye view of Tucson before the rivers dried up, and that can show you what Tucson can look like. And then the hopeful side, I love this stat, because I grew up in Tucson, and Tucson is using the same amount of water now as we were using in the mid 80s, even though our population is so much bigger. And that is because of folks like Anne. We changed our water use practices, our landscaping practices, without city mandates making us do so. And because of that, we have been banking our share of the Colorado River water. And I consider that just such a hopeful and a positive thing. Tucson can do this. We already done it. Other cities right now in the Southwest are going through great pains and trying to figure out how they can rein in their water usage. And not that we can't do better in Tucson, we certainly can. But we're doing very well. And it's important to acknowledge our successes. And with that, I know it's possible to get to the canopy goals that we're aiming at.
Thank you, Adam, for that closing word of inspiration. We thank all three of you for the time you took tonight, and the time that you've taken for these years before. It's amazing, Anne, the stuff you've produced, and Vikram, the programs that you've initiated, and now you're guiding this whole tree equity thing, and Adam just down in the dirt and raising it up to the sky. It's beautiful examples of different ways that we can contribute and live fully in this time of challenge. Again, you make it seem not only possible, but even fun to engage in this work that is play. So we will formally adjourn. You're welcome to stick around for a minute if you like. Janet,
We'll have announcements.
okay, Paula, if you'd like, just one moment. Jana had asked about mesquite guilds, and I think what we'll do is we'll let either she can stick around and ask somebody as we after we formally adjourn, or maybe someone can reach out to Jana with their thoughts about mesquite guilds. It sounds like another social cultural way to improve our relationship with the urban forest. So Vikram, I know it's late for you, especially in Maryland. Please feel free to stick around or just slide out, and again, our gratitude to you tonight.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming and attending this evening. I appreciate the invitation.
Yeah. And Paula will make a few announcements for Sustainable Tucson.
Well, I would also reiterate Stuart's thanks to all three of you. It was a fascinating presentation and a whole wonderful set of ideas and encouragements and awareness of what we need to have to really expand our tree canopy and our urban forests. So thank you very much. As I said, we wanted to do announcements at the end, and I would like to share an announcement. The Tucson Verde Rotary Club on April 21st is going to have, they're setting up a home tour of eco-friendly residences or homes with sustainable features. And they'd like to include 6 or 7 homes at a variety of price points. Ones that incorporate sustainable features, new builds, tiny homes, auxiliary dwelling units, and remodeled historic homes. So if anyone has a home that they would like to have featured on this tour, you can get in touch with the Tucson Verde Rotary Club. I don't have an email for it, but it should be pretty easy to find on the website, or you can email me and I will try to get a link and a specific person to contact for that. So that should be an interesting opportunity on April 21st to get a really fascinating home tour.